Alright, so welcome to part two of this, I guess now two-part stream on creating this surveillance camera. And so in the previous stream, if you remember, well, previous part, we had a little bit of issue with when I was trying to, let's see, where is that? Let's see, where was the file? Da, da, da. So I was trying to get a pointer to the Cryengine plugin. Well, so doing a little bit of work on this, and I realized that there's at this point there's no real need for this. This might come in handy, though, when we were. I think this could come in handy. Like if you remember, with previously we discussed on making sure that this is the player. Well, what I think this could come in handy is, once I figure out how to do it, is if we compare these two pointers. So what I'm going to do is, if you remember, we were casting the ray, but not here just yet. But let's see, where was that? So we had the ray cast, and what this was also returning the pointer to the P entity that we collided with, or we hit. So I'm thinking, if we can compare these two pointers, and if we determine that they're the same, we know that indeed we've hit a player or a player entity. For now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get the actual collision, or not the collision, but the actual entity that we hit, and with that we can actually track it. Now that this is the player or not, we don't really know just yet. So what I'm going to do is we're going to change this, and this is going to be helpful going forward as well. So we're going to change this raycast from being a void to actually returning a P entity pointer, or an entity pointer. So we have the surveillance camera here. So let's go ahead and change the return type for this. So this is going to be an entity pointer raycast. All the parameters are going to be still the same. Okay, so let's go back in here and fix this. So this is going to be an entity pointer, and so when we hit it, what we're going to return is return P entity, if we did find something, or we're going to return null. Okay, so now that the raycast is actually returning something, let's go ahead and add this in. So let's go to our, one second here. So we go back to our surveillance component, and this is where we're trying to get the pointer to the plugin. So like I said, this might come in handy to be able to compare the two pointers and see if we're actually pointing to the same thing. And at that point, we know that that is our player. But that is probably going to come in a future video once I actually figure out how this is done. Okay, so what we're going to move on to is also one of the things that I wanted to highlight, and that I kind of mistakenly forgot, was when we were registering this, you'll notice that I've named this register surveillance component, but I had the same name in here. So this would probably will probably result in a compilation error, just as you see down here. So we want to make sure that these are different. So surveillance camera, and then surveillance camera. Okay, so just to alleviate whatever issue those might cause. Alright, so going back into our surveillance component, we need to cast the ray. So if you remember previously, I've shown that the camera is panning left and right just as expected. But now we need to cast that ray. So first of all, the ray is going to return that P entity. So we need to store that into something. So what I've added is an entity pointer to what we currently, I think this could be named as a hit entity. So we're not really calling it out loud, this is our player. So right now we'll just call it hit entity, p hit entity. So where are we going to cast the ray from? Well, the ray is going to be cast in searching. So searching is going to be, we're going to have m hit entity equals, and who's casting this? This is being cast by our camera component. So this is going to be ray cast. And this is going to take a couple of a direction and a let's take a quick look at this. So what do we need? We need a direction, a position, and our ray length. So first of all, we need to get the direction. So that's going to be get entity, which is our surveillance component basically, or the entity that contains this. Then we're going to get world rotation, and out of this, we're going to need to get, actually this is a dot, and get column 1. So column 1 is actually the vector pointing forward. So get column 1, and so we have the direction. Now we just need to get the position. So our position is just our entity position. So get entity arrow get position, I think we can do get world position. I'm always having a little bit of a hard time. I mean, one of them is like local position and the other one is like world position, so I'm going to go with the world position for this one. And the other thing that we need to do is the ray length. So how far in the forward direction are we going to cast this? So this is going to be cast, let's call it 10 meters. Okay, so we're casting this. We're getting it in our m hit entity pointer. So now what are we going to do? Well, first of all, if we find the player, and again in this check we might be checking to see if the m hit entity is the same as whatever our player component pointer is. So, but that later on. For now, we just make sure that okay, our found player is going to be of type living. So we set the state to found. And once in found, just like before, you know, we did this already. We set the light to a different style, a different diffuse multiplier, and then we go into tracking. So once we are in tracking, what do we need to do here? Well, once we're in tracking, we actually need to start panning the camera towards the player. So in order to do that, what we're going to need to actually orient it that way. So how do we do that? First of all, we need to have a direction, right? So in order to get the direction, we need two vectors, because basically that's how you calculate direction. You subtract the position of where you want this to be pointed at, and from its origin, so where it's coming from. So basically we're going to have a vec3, actually I'm not typing in where I'm supposed to be. So let's go ahead, and while we're tracking, we're going to have two vectors. So one vec3 is going to be player position, or at least we're thinking it's the player, right? So position, and that's going to be our, how do we know which one that is? Yeah, well, it's our m hit entity. Get position. So one thing to do here is we're going to make a quick check to see if we actually have the pointer. So just so that in case there's nothing there, we're not going to be performing all this work. Okay, so we get the position of the entity that we just hit. Once we have that, we need to get the camera position. So where this is going to be started from our direction vector. So in order to do that, we're just going to do vec3, and this is going to be cam position, and this is going to be equal to, let's see, and this is going to be equal to get entity, get position. So get entity and get position. Okay, so at this point we can create our direction vector, so how our camera is going to be oriented. So vec3 and phi direction. So this is going to be equal to player position minus cam position. There we go. Okay, so we got that. Now what we need to do is we need to set the orientation. So in order to do that, one way you can do it is you can do via the m_p entity, which just references your current entity. So or you can just do get entity. So this is going to be mp entity. Oh, actually, without that, and we're going to set its rotation to, and this is going to be it's going to be a quaternion. This is the set rotation function needs a quaternion, and this is pretty straightforward. So for the quaternion, we're going to create a rotation v direction, and we have the v direction, correct? So what I'm going to pass into this, our vector, v direction. Okay. So with that being said, I think we can take a look and see if this works and actually tracks our player. So let's go ahead and build this, see if we have any issues. And all looks good. So let's start our local debugger here and see if once the player walks into, I would say, like the line of fire, so to speak, right? If oh, and there we go. One issue is that, as you can see, the camera is actually tracking it a little lower than what I would like it to be. So if you look at it, it's actually, I believe, it's currently looking at the player's feet because that's where the player origin is at. So let's go ahead and I think also, let's see, do we have one thing that is something that I really like is as this edit and continue feature. So I have it in a separate video, and all you need to do is add this little bit of code into right below the version 3.6.2 right there. So what this is going to do is you're going to be able to make changes to your code and not have to shut down the engine. So in order to do that, one thing that I want to do is I'm going to build this in profile because it runs a lot quicker. The build is a lot quicker that way. Okay, so let's close out of this. And as I was mentioning, this is the player position currently is at the player's feet. So we want to actually raise that a little higher, so it's kind of pointing at the chest or somewhere around that area. So in order to do that, we have the vector player position. So I'm just going to do a plus, and I'm going to add another vec3 to this. And what do we want to do? We want to add 0 on the x-axis, 0 on the y-axis, and let's do a 1.5 f on the z-axis. So let's see how this works. So I'm going to start this off, and hopefully now the camera is going to be pointed, you know, a little bit up, you know, so it's not going to be pointing like straight down at the player's feet. So let's see how that works. And yep, reload. Okay, yes. If you want me to reload the solution, sure. Let's try this again. Okay, so the camera is panning around, and there we go. So now if you look at the camera is like following you around, and it's pointing a little bit more towards you, and you can probably even move it a little higher. And you know, if you look at the light is also, if you remember from last time, we've set this so that once it goes into that tracking mode, it changes the way it's behaving. You know, like it has that flashing thing to it. But one of the things that we haven't done is what happens when you exit game mode. So you can see that this is still flashing, so we don't really want to do that. So let's go ahead and actually, if you remember, we had if is game mode, but we also might want to have an else. So if it's not in game mode, so let's see, well, where does this close? It closes, I believe, somewhere around here. Yeah, there we go. So we're going to do an else, and once you exit game mode, and I'm just going to copy and paste this. So we set things back to the way they were, and because if you so one of the things that I've done is when in the editor, I'm actually disabling it. So I think what we can do is we can actually leave it to be on, because I kind of like it when it's on like that. So that and true. Okay, but now we're not really we're tracking the player. But what if the player goes out of the range of the camera, or you know, your turret? Well, in that case, let's actually make sure that we're making use of this resetting state. So let's do that. So first of all, in our tracking, we've seen that this works just fine, but we want to check to see what the size or the length of of this vector is. So let's go ahead and do that. So if v direction dot length, so if our length is greater than 10, and again, this can be probably in the future could be like one of those schematic available variables that you can, you know, edit inside the editor. So if the length is greater than 10 meters, what do we want to do? We want to set our timer. So timer, we want to set this value to be 5 seconds. And also our cam search is going to be set to resetting. So what that means, if the length of the vector between you and the camera, or the player and the camera, is greater than 10 meters, you're 10 meters, more than 10 meters away, we're going to jump into this resetting state and set the timer to 5 seconds. So let's go ahead and do that. Well, first of all, what do we need to do once we get into the resetting state? We want to subtract from the timer, so minus equals, and we're going to subtract f frame time. So what do we want to do? We want to check to see if the timer is less than 0, so if our 5 seconds have elapsed. And what to do if that's the case? Well, first of all, we're going to set our surveillance, and what did I name that? And surveillance component. So we're going to set this because right now we're not tracking you anymore. So this is going to be set to false. And at the same time, we want to go back into our regular search. So I'm just going to copy the the action done to the flashlight. And this could be, probably would be nice to be refactored into a function where you're saying, okay, flashlight revert to searching, or flashlight searching, something like that, where you just, in the function you do all this work. For now, I'll just keep it in here. I didn't really get around to make it that fancy. Okay, what are we going to do? We're going to go back to our white color, our 5 diffuse multiplier, and no flashing. Okay, so once we're done with that, we want to set the state, right? We want to set the state back to cam search. We want to set it back to searching. So you're more than 10 meters away. The camera is going to stay there for 5 seconds. And once the 5 seconds have elapsed, it's going to go back into its searching pattern. Okay, so I think that should be it. So let's take a look and see how this behaves. If you remember, the editor is still running. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly pause it, and I'm going to hit continue. So this is just going to recompile the code, and we'll be able to jump back into the editor. And like I said, profile is a lot quicker. So let's see how this behaves. Okay, so our camera is panning around, searching. So let's see once it finds us. Okay, so it found us, it going into that crazy red mode. So let's go farther away. Okay, so we're farther than 10 meters. And let's see, 5 seconds have elapsed. So now the camera is going back into its searching mode. So it's just panning around. And let's see if it finds us again. And coming back around, and oops, okay, there we go. So now we're being tracked again. Now that's kind of scary. So we're being tracked again, and we're going farther than 10 meters away, and the camera is still stuck in that position. And let's see. Okay, so now we're more than 10 meters away, and 5 seconds have elapsed, and it's going back into its normal search pattern. All right, so my apologies for that little hiccup with the game plugin. Hopefully, once I get that figured out, and I'll be able to actually we'll actually give it a try and see if we can differentiate between any living entity and the actual player entity. So I'm going to be pushing this code later on today to the GitHub repo and post that link into the video description on YouTube. But again, thanks for stopping by to this follow-up section to get this thing a little bit more flushed out, and a little bit in a more finished state. And we'll see you guys on the next stream. Thank you so much for stopping by again, and have a great week coming up. Alright, bye everyone.